recorded some of the best recordings of their career, which they made with Lee Scratch Perry. And then a couple years after that, or around the same time, you start to do your own productions. And you had some very memorable works with Augustus Pablo, whose first album you produced. This is Augustus Pablo. So can you tell us a bit about your own productions, your own production style? Who were you working with? What was it like working with people like the Wailers and Augustus Pablo?
Well, to me, it was very challenging. I mean, I was young then, I was about 17 at the time. So I brought a fresh dimension to the music business, opposed to my father's early recordings with the Scatterlights and, you know, with the names I mentioned early on. But I didn't actually start producing until a year after the studio was built, and it was around 1970, just about the time I was leaving school, with a young musician by the name of Augustus Pablo. There were other musicians down there at the time, too, like Tyrone Downey, which we called Organ D, and you know, several other guys that came after. But Pablo was always a person that loved to be around the piano. You know, he spent most of his school hours in the chapel practicing on the piano, and occasionally when Douglas Forrest, which is the headmaster at the time, would pass and see him in there and saying, "Mr. Swavey, what are you doing here?" And he says, he is rehearsing for the choir. And Mr. Forrest would say, "But there is no choir inside here, so how are you rehearsing?" He says, "Well, I'm just, you know, getting warmed up." Not knowing that he's actually studying out a track that he wants to do. But bringing Pablo down to Randy's at the time was a great experience for him, because we're the same age, you know, we're the same age bracket. And working alongside Earl Thompson, which was the in-house engineer at the time, brought a fresh dimension to the music business, and we sort of revolutionized the whole aspect of the reggae. Because, you know, coming out of ska, going into rocksteady, from rocksteady into the early reggae, which is, you know, a lot of the British people call it skinhead. But, you know, I took it to a different, more heavier sound, and we call it rockers. That was the rockers era. You know, that was the era when everyone was looking for a different change in the music business, you know. And the musicians that what we used to use at the time would be like Aston Hammerman, baritone bass, Lloyd Tinley, Adams on drums, and we'd use Pablo on piano, you know, China on rhythm guitar, or Dougie and Leaf. And occasionally we just mix it up with bringing little drums, you know, might bring in Sticky to play a bongo drums, or we might get Scully to put on some tambourine or whatever, just to spice it up. So Java was actually the first big tune that I actually produced in 1972. It became the #1 instrumental, and from that stage on, there was no turning back. You know, I knew that my life was in music, and I never changed. You know, to this day, I still have the uttermost respect to the younger musicians that are taken to a different level and more revolutionize the dub sound, which a fact that David just brought up. The Java dub was the very first dub album that came out in 1973. Before Blackboard Jungle, before Aquarius dub, and that dub album that Joe Gibbs got credit for, the Essential.
Dub serial.
Dub serial.
Yeah.
You know, the Java dub wasn't really done for commercial purpose. It was really for sound system. But you see, the actual feel to the dub was experimental. It was nothing really commissioned, because the sense of just putting out a plain rhythm on the B-side of a record, like you call it a version, you know, I say we call it dub. And it became so popular because, you see, Randy Randy's was not only just a record store, it was a distribution. So in order for your records to sell, you have to be in competition with the others. So you have the flow of Lee Scratch Perry, you have the flow of Bonnie Lee, which call him Striker, you have Nine the Observer, you know, you have Loopy Edwards, Herman Chinloy, you know, Conceptors, and a host of other people, Derek Harriott, you know, everybody was getting involved with the dub production. But because our production, was timeless, we didn't have to watch the clock because, you know, obviously the studio was there, but the other musicians had to watch the clock and say, boy, them book tours, them have to make sure them get enough production done within that 2 hours. But for the Randy's production, we can just take it straight into the following day because, you know, we didn't have to pay for studio time.
Right.
You understand? So that's the reason why, you know, we had a little bit more clarity and a little bit more edge on doing, you know, stuff like that.
So in a moment, I'm going to open things up for question and answer with the audience, because I'm sure there's some of you who have some specific questions that you'd like to put to Clive Chin. But before we go to that, I'd like to ask you just the last few questions. So first of all, if you could sum up the Randy's sound in terms of a studio, I mean, as you were mentioning, anyone that did not have a studio of their own was working there. So, which is partly why it was such a crucial space. So many classic recordings were actually made there. But if you could sum up, what made the Randy's sound distinctive from any other studio or any other production force out there?
Because it had a dirty sound. It was very dirty. It wasn't clean like Federal. It wasn't purified like Dynamic. And it wasn't commercialized like Aquarius or Harry J. It had a dirty sound. Muddy, sticky, choppy. That's what people want. No one nothing too purified and too clean and too, you know, commercialized or sugar down or whatever you want to call it.
So you mean
that dirty sound?
So you mean it was more authentic?
Very authentic.
And it perhaps reflected its placement right in the heart of downtown Kingston.
You could not have wanted a much better place than central Kingston. You understand? Because I remember enough time when we used to take the sessions, you know, you used to hear the bus, the sounds of the bus coming through the door. And when I said try and take it over again, I said no man, leave that, that is perfect. That gives it a little bit more gravity. You understand me? Nothing wasn't diminished when I'm telling you. Very sound when we did all want certain sound effects, we make it. We don't go looking the soundtrack or the Pro Tools. We don't even know about Pro Tools at time. We take all the microphone and carry it to the toilet and flush it. And we pop up some back inside of the studio and say, and we rewind tape, back forward, and then we get all them kind of sound.
Right.
You used to drive the people crazy. So what's up, what's up? I said, boy, you don't know, man. Just leave it alone. Randy sound.
Okay.
That's why the producers, them all wanted it.
Okay, so my last question for you before we open it up for question and answer with the audience. Since the dawning of the 1980s, you've been based outside of Jamaica. You moved to New York, and I understand for a while you were running a restaurant, and you were less concretely involved in music, but of course you never left it, and you're still involved in production today. So can you tell us a little bit about the recent productions you've been doing and what you're working on now?
Well, when I got back into the music, because it was in my blood from the beginning, doing the food business was nice,